Five, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Looking good. All right. Hello, willkommen, bienvenue, konnichiwa, ni hao, jambo, marhaba. It's time for the Armist Inquisition yet again, episode 242 on Sunday, the 7th of August, 2022. I'm Amish Phil.
I'm Amish Matt.
And Amish Ben is on vacay.
He is on vacay.
In the Far East.
He is in the Far East
of England.
Of Anglia.
But never fear, because we have Mat Chinn from the Apocalypse YouTube channel. How are you doing, Matt?
Good, guys. How you guys doing?
Good.
Excellent. You're well rested as well, aren't you, Matt? You've just got back from vacay?
I got back from vacay. Short delay on the way back from the vacay.
But not a day wrecker.
Not a day wrecker, no. I wouldn't say so. It's good to be back feeling cold again.
It's been nice today.
It has, hasn't it?
About? Anyway, I digress. Do you know where I'd like to go on vacation?
Where? Atlantis?
Yes, yes. And I feel, Matt, you might have a good idea where maybe I should start my quest.
Yeah, well, I found something in the Azores that looks like it could be Atlantis, so that might be a great place to start.
Yeah, and if you haven't seen us talk with Matt before, go back to the previous episode. Can't remember which number it was. It's a while back, isn't it? But,
yeah, around about a year has it been?
Something like that, maybe more.
I think it was May 21.
Oh,
May 21, right. Yeah, because I think you were maybe 3 or 4 videos into your series about that time.
5, I think, something
That's
like
it.
that.
And you've been doing some more research in the meantime. So, yeah, it'd be good to catch up and see what the latest developments are.
Yeah, that sounds good.
All right. So, how shall we proceed? Do you want to give us a bit of background first, or jump straight into the slides, or?
Just a very quick background. I guess anyone who's watching this, it would be good to recap on the last episode. So go back and look that one up. But basically, I've used undersea scans to try and locate the lost city of Atlantis in the Azores. And there's something in the middle of the Azores plateau that looks very much like the canals of Atlantis. There's 2 circular canals. They're concentric with each other. They're 27 stadia in diameter in total, which is the width that Plato gives for the lost city of Atlantis. So I've been trying to do research on top of what I spoke about previously on the last episode to see if there's any other reasons for why this feature might be there. If it might not be Atlantis, but if it is, there's a lot going on that ties into even modern locations that are above sea today.
Right, I follow you. And this undersea survey, that's what they call bathymetry, isn't it?
That's right, yeah. That's basically a compilation of bathymetric scans that have been put together by a European agency. And these bathymetric scans are, you just have an array of sonar. It's towed behind a scanning vessel, and it just sends out a sonar ping, and it produces an image from what's reflected back from the seafloor.
Right, generates like a 3D picture of what the ocean floor looks like.
It's a bit like if you get an ultrasound of a baby, but it's the sort of seafloor instead of something much smaller.
Right, cool. So that's what a lot of your work has been sort of relying on, and you've also been tying together sort of. There's a lot of mathematics in your videos.
That's right, yeah. I've been looking into the research of some authors, Howard Crowhurst, Richard Heath, and Robin Heath. And their work, I think, it sort of really stems from the work of John Michel and others that have come before. And there's some really interesting information from the research of Howard Crowhurst and Richard Heath in particular, and it ties into my own research. So it's to do with geodesy, really, which is measuring the size and shape of the planet, because that would be critical if you were trying to map the planet.
So is this solving the problem of longitude as well?
It would solve the problem of longitude. It wouldn't be 100% accurate, but you'd have an idea of where you were, right, within a few degrees,
Because this is one of the criticisms that the naysayers or the mainstream posit, don't they? That ocean going, seafaring at that sort of level wasn't possible until the invention of the chronometer thing. I can't remember what it's called.
Yeah, that's right. So a chronometer is basically just another word for a watch. But there are some chronometers that have been, well, the early chronometers, because they were large, they had to be made to be seaworthy, because when they're on the waves, they have to be almost sort of gimbal, so they don't get disrupted too much by the movement of the waves. So that's an ocean-going chronometer. And obviously people say you don't know where your longitude was unless you had a chronometer, because you could, if you knew the time of the sunset from the port where you left, and you measured the time of the sunset where you currently were in the sea, that time difference could be used to calculate your longitude. Right. And what I think people incorrectly say is they tell you that before the chronometer you didn't know your longitude, but there are books. There's a book called Cosmographia. It's about 500, maybe 600 years old. And it tells you how people found out their longitude by looking at the moon and comparing its angle to a star. And then they refer to lookup tables and star charts that have been compiled at observatories, which they use to calculate the longitude. It's not as accurate as a chronometer, but it's good enough for seafaring.
Right.
I think the other thing that, that kind of we've been reading a little bit about this, it comes to my mind, is if it was in when the sea levels were lower, was that in sort of like the last ice age and things like that, that there would be sort of more land masses across sort of the oceans and things like that you could potentially bump into as well and come across, perhaps?
Yeah, that's definitely true as well. That would make navigation much easier. If you look at something called floodmap.net, you can use that piece of software to roll back the sea level, or you can just look at some other bathymetric software, and you will see there's not that many large islands, but there are a number of islands that are now submerged, which would have made hopping across the Atlantic a lot easier than it is today.
Yeah, and I think that, that's something that perhaps, I don't know, do people sort of think about a lot, especially when you're sort of talking about perhaps a migration, from Australasia or, Polynesia, that kind of place, across sort of like the Pacific, an island hopping that way to maybe sort of South America. That perhaps would be more possible then.
I think a lot depends on things like currents and the technology of the ship as well, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Because I remember when I read that Gavin Menzies book about the Chinese treasure fleet, he was talking about how they would use the sort of natural currents, and because they didn't have, well, as far as we know, they didn't have steam power or any other kind of way of generating motion other than using the sails, the wind. So yeah, that comes into it again, I guess, as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think an example, I can't remember the name of the author, but there's somebody that's suggesting that the Phoenicians might have found it easier to go to America first before going back to Europe to do with the sort of the ocean current. So that it's possible that the Phoenicians were in the Americas, but that's not confirmed.
Yeah. Well, what should we do? Should we move on to some slides?
Let's do it. Yeah, slide 1.
I feel like. Do you feel like Chris Whitty?
I'm too good looking to be Chris Whitty.
Correct.
Yeah.
You're a beautiful man.
I didn't want to say.
Thank you.
So
I'm modest as well.
So, now this is very interesting. We've got Avebury up there at the top.
Yes.
With the stone circles. We've got Delphi, famous for its oracle.
Yeah.
And Thebes, one of the major cult centres for in Egypt. So what's going on? Why have we highlighted these things?
Okay, so these three locations are pointed out by Richard Heath in one of his books, and he points out that these locations are on key latitudes. So it looks like people in the ancient past, to try and characterize the size of the planet, they divided the northern hemisphere into 7 equally spaced latitudes. I think the reasoning behind this is because if you just measure the distance between any two of these latitudes, you can just multiply that by the number of segments to work out the entire size of the planet.
Handy.
Yes.
So it's really important locations as well. So Avebury is the largest stone circle on the planet, not just the UK or Europe. So that's a very significant feature. And both Delphi and Thebes are marked out by these two stones called omphalos stones. They're supposed to represent the navel of the Earth.
Right.
So, there's quite a lot of coincidences going on here.
Well, last week when we were talking to Ralph, he said that the omphalos stone moved from Thebes to Delphi, to the Oracle of Delphi. So that's a nice tie into last week. Can I just clear something up? Are we saying that the Earth is divided into 7 latitude segments equally?
So it's sort of humans projecting those latitudes onto the Earth. So it's not a natural thing. It's just it ties into. But it ties into pi.
If you carry those lines downwards past Thebes, you get another 1, 2, 3, 4. You get another sort of 4 lines equally spaced.
See, yeah. So the Thebes is the 2/7 line of latitude, and then if you went down one more, there isn't. I've not drawn a line on there.
No.
There's one above the equator. Then there's the equator. Then you can reflect them. I should note at this point, probably before we go any further, Richard Heath mentions that these 3 latitudes are more important than the other latitudes because the Earth is an oblate sphere. So what that means is the Earth isn't perfectly spherical; it's slightly squashed. So the distance between the North and South Pole is slightly less than it is at the equator. So at these specific latitudes, that oblate nature of the sphere is almost, it's irrelevant at those latitudes. It's not very significant. So if you start to use latitudes above those, if you use the latitudes above Avebury, the oblate nature of the Earth makes it a little bit less accurate to characterize the size of the planet. So that's why those 3 latitudes are important.
Got you. Yeah, it sort of distorts the picture, unless you knew when you were doing your calculations that the Earth was, I think it's 26 miles wider, isn't it, at the equator? Something like that.
Yeah, it's something like that. But it's enough to sort of throw off your measurements. So you could miss your destination port, and it could add a few hours onto your journey. And potentially, if you missed the critical point of an ocean current, it could really hamper your journey.
Cool. So these are 3 important latitudes. Is there anything else to say on this one?
So Thebes is throughout the various dynasties of ancient Egypt, there were different capitals, and Thebes served as the capital of ancient Egypt for multiple different dynasties. So obviously that's another important reason for why that's a location.
And Delphi we talked about, that's the famous oracle where people would go and find out whether it was a good idea to have a war or a battle. Is it a good time? What do you think? That's the oracle. And then Avebury is kind of enigmatic, isn't it? Because it's in prehistory.
That's right. Yeah, there's some important dates as well. So Avebury, the first part of Avebury was laid in sort of 3000 BC, right in the middle of the first Egyptian dynasty. But the whole complex wasn't. They didn't do anything else to it until about 2600 BC. So that the rest of the complex was built 400 years later, at exactly the same time that the pyramids started to be built in both Egypt and also in a region of South America called Carol. So they started building pyramids in Egypt and South America at exactly the same time, while also Avebury was being built at the same time.
Busy guys. Must have had Nick Knowles running the job. Cool. Right. Do you want me to move on, or?
I was going to say, yeah, if we move on to the next slide, because I can start to talk about these things in a bit more detail, each one of these locations.
Excellent. Okay, next one. Oh.
Okay, so at these same latitudes, on the same latitude of Delphi, is we have where I've located what I think could be Atlantis. So again, that's a key latitude. I think Atlantis, if I'm correct about it, it would have been important for the purposes of geodesy, and perhaps 7,000 or 8,000 years later, after the Ice Age ended, because the place was submerged, then maybe they needed a new site at that same latitude, and Delphi would have fit the bill for that.
Right. Yeah. Makes sense.
Obviously, everybody's heard of Bimini, and obviously there's a lot of contention as to whether or not there's the Bimini Road or Bimini Wall is a very shallow feature made from limestone near the surface of the water. It's just under the surface of the water at Bimini, off the west coast of Bimini. And if that is a man-made construction, it just happens to be at the perfect latitude for doing more observation. And what I say about Bimini, it's the only place in the Atlantic that's at that exact latitude. So if you're trying to build observatories to create lookup tables for sailors to work out their longitude, you'll need somewhere on the west of the Atlantic. You'll need somewhere on the east of the Atlantic. And it'd probably make a lot of sense to have somewhere in the middle as well, especially if it was somewhere where you could park your boat. And if Atlantis was real and it was the capital of a large empire, they're going to be heading east and west. So you will need observatories there, and specifically on that latitude.
Right. You said, just going back, you said Bimini is the only place on that latitude. Do you mean on the west coast of North America?
So if you look at the entire Atlantic Ocean,
yeah,
there are no islands at that latitude other than Bimini and an island called Great Harbor Cay, which, funny enough, they used to both be part of a larger island. I'll go into that in more detail in a few slides' time. It probably makes more sense to talk about that in a bit.
I think I get it now. So if you set off from the west coast of Africa, you're not hitting anything if you stay on that latitude till you get to Bimini.
Correct, yeah.
Right, got you. Whereas there are other islands dotted around sort of all over the shop in the Atlantic. That makes sense. Right. Got you. Okay, do you want to move on?
Yeah, next slide, please.
You're enjoying that, aren't you?
I'm in charge. I've got power.
The lady got your head. All right, Avebury.
Okay, so this is a close-up on Avebury, and I've put this in to really highlight the accuracy of the positioning of Avebury. Wow. So that 4/7 line of latitude goes straight through the center of Avebury. It's not close to it. It's not at a tangent. It goes straight through Avebury.
That is mad.
So what kind of precision technology you would need to do this? I don't think you would need satellites or electronics or anything. I'm adamant you could use something similar to a modern sextant, but probably bigger to get that level of accuracy.
And a high level of sort of mathematics and geometry as well, like rather than technological advancement, intellectual advancement.
Yes, I don't think there's any requirement for high technology in terms of what we would recognize today as high technology. What it would require is a advanced knowledge of both geometry and mathematics.
Yeah. That's, I mean, you just can't argue with that. It goes right through the middle of it. I mean, people will say coincidence, but that's just, I mean, it's not like Avebury is just some small, insignificant monument, like a small 10-foot wide small stone circle. It's one of the most impressive in the country, isn't it? Without a doubt.
It's the largest in the whole world. So
even better. It's the largest in the world. Right. That's significant to me. I can't see that being a coincidence, but.
Okay, it's probably good to move on to the next slide.
Okay.
It might explain what's going on.
Oh, triangles.
Yes. So I'll briefly explain what the triangles are. I've just put on a number of random triangles. They're of no real significance. I've just chosen random points. But there are a number of authors that think in the Neolithic that when people were taking measurements, they didn't know trigonometry as we know it today. They didn't know cosine. They didn't know tangents, etc. What they probably did is they probably just used right angle triangles and used integer-based measurements to figure out the size of things. I think Avebury may have been used twice in the past, so I'm absolutely on board with the academic dates for modern Avebury, starting in 3000 BC, and the constructions carried on until it finished in about 2600 BC. But I think it may have been used as well in the far more distant past, probably at the peak of the last glacial maximum. I'll go into that a bit in the next slide. But I think the idea being is once you've discovered your latitude at the 4/7 line of latitude, you could do a survey all the way down to the 3/7 line of latitude. So you take a load of surveys from 3 points at triangles that you could see within the distance of the horizon. You'd measure the true south length of the first triangle, and you'd repeat this until you went all the way down to the next line of latitude. You'd add all of these surveys together, and you get a distance of 1,428.85 kilometers, or whatever unit of measurement they might have been using in the ancient past.
Right, so like megalithic yards, or what did they use in Egypt? Cubits or something like that. How would they know?
Cubits, yeah.
Stadia. Stadia, yeah, even better. How would they know that they were travelling true south? Would that be through astronomical observations or solar observations? Or?
Yeah, that's correct. So the beauty of traveling true south is you don't have to wait for an equinox or a solstice. You can do it every day at noon. So you wait until noon, you pick a point on the horizon, and you just travel to that point on the horizon, and you're following a true south line.
Right. So as long as your Rolex is correct and you know when noon is.
So you can tell when high noon is by the length of the shadows. So
you make it sound so easy. It's really dark.
No, I know, yeah.
I think people in the Neolithic would have been able to use sundials and measure just shadows from sticks in the same way that we look at our digital watches or smartphones these days. They're just used to that level of technology, so it would probably be second nature to most people.
Yeah, and then they would use some sort of device to measure. Now, hang on a minute. That line's going through the sea.
That's right. Yeah.
How do you? You need a long rope to measure across the sea.
That's right, and that's where the next slide comes in.
Oh gosh, I haven't looked at these, by the way.
Oh wait, it's the one after this.
Right.
If we skip to the next one, I'll go back to this one in a minute. Okay, so this
is in the Ice Age.
I've added on the Ice Age coastline at the peak of the last glacial maximum. So I don't think it's an accident that Avebury sits at 4/7 of the way from the equator to the North Pole. I also don't think it's an accident that it sits exactly at its precise longitude, because that's the westernmost longitude, or the closest point to the Atlantic, where you could take a survey entirely on foot all the way down to the next line of latitude. Any further west and you'd have to enter the Atlantic Ocean. So this is why I think Avebury in particular was used to measure the size of the planet, and I would argue it's probably the most important and maybe first location that was used for this very purpose.
Yeah, that's a hell of a coincidence, isn't it? Avebury's the furthest. If you go any further west to build your Avebury complex, you're going to end up in the sea once you travel south. That's right. How reliable is this coastline, Ice Age, glacial maximum coastline? How have they worked that out?
Basically, that's worked out from the sea level would have been back in the last glacial maximum. So it's between about 140 and 120 meters lower than it was today. So I would say that is probably out by no more than a mile, I would guess.
Yeah, it's a close estimate. Got you.
And what year is this, or what sort of age range is the sort of the glacial maximum?
So it would have been a couple of thousand years either side of 20,000 years ago.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, it's like nearly 10,000 years before the Younger Dryas.
Yeah.
But was it pretty stable between then and the Younger Dryas, though?
I believe it was pretty stable.
Yeah.
That whole part of the world would have been pretty dangerous. In terms of megafauna, there were lots of animals that would have certainly wanted to kill you.
Yeah.
But it's also, Avebury is far enough south that you wouldn't have come across the sort of glaciation either. It would have been free of ice at Avebury.
That's a good point, because I think sort of Scotland and a lot of Scandinavia would have been under the ice sheet, wouldn't it?
Well, possibly even up where you guys are right now as well.
Yeah.
We'd be up at the wall, wouldn't we?
The ice wall.
Yes, we would, yeah.
Yeah. Cool. Do you want me to flick back to the one we skipped over?
Yeah, if we flick back to the previous one. Okay, so this is really me just sort of looking into the work of Howard Crowhurst right here. So Howard Crowhurst points out that Silbury Hill, which is, I think it's the largest man-made mound in Europe, it happens to be exactly 1,000th of the distance between the 4/7 line of latitude and the 3/7 line of latitude. So it's almost as if somebody in the ancient past has built a monument for anybody in the future to use to measure the size of the planet. So if you took that original survey between the 4/7 line of latitude and the 3/7 line of latitude, you would multiply that by 28 to work out the entire circumference of the planet. So what you get with Silbury Hill and Avebury is you get a much simpler solution, where if you did a survey between the center of Avebury and walked south to Silbury Hill, you would times that by 28,000 and you have the exact size of the planet. So if our civilization gets wiped out, we've got a tool that we can use to remeasure the size of the planet. And this was built for us 4,500 years ago.
Wow. What's the as far as Silbury Hill goes, what's the latest understanding of when that was built or made, constructed?
I can't remember the exact dates, but I believe it was a little bit after Avebury itself.
Shortly after, as far as we know.
Yeah, what's interesting to me is obviously it would be very, very difficult after the Ice Age to do a survey between the 4/7 and 3/7 line of latitude. So I'm wondering if the builders of Avebury in modern times had some kind of information that was passed on to them, or a cache of information they uncovered somewhere that allowed them to build these monuments.
Ah, right, I see. So, right, I've got you. So we're assuming that this knowledge comes from around the glacial maximum, because that is when it would have been possible to do it over land, travelling south. But
That's right.
But the archaeology says that these monuments are modern, the Neolithic, but after the Younger Dryas. So therefore, there's a bridge that needs a gap that needs bridging there.
I think so. I do believe the dates that are declared for Avebury and other sites around the world, but I wouldn't be surprised if they were built on top of something that was either there before or something that's no longer there.
Yeah, we had this Kaylee was into that, wasn't she? History of Kaylee.
Yeah.
That, when you date these things, you date in the last sort of erection. You date in the last erection, not necessarily, those stones could have been picked up and moved and used on the same site in a slightly different configuration, and we would never know. We can only go off what we have in front of us, which is the latest date, if you like.
Yeah.
We could go back for millennia before that. So, yeah, that makes sense. And I guess that's why you think, when you said earlier, that you think this site's been used for a lot longer than the archaeology would allow at the moment.
Yeah, the reason I believe the dates is I believe it ties in with the quarries. So the stones where they got the sarsen stones were in quarries a little bit southeast of Avebury, sort of in between Avebury and Stonehenge. And I believe the dates of the sort of sediment at the quarries that's refilled in sort of ties in with these locations. So I even believe the stones were dug out when it's said, but it's likely that people wanted to mark this out to be very significant, because there's not many locations where you can walk between the 4/7 line and 3/7 line of latitude. So I'm guessing they just decided to use the old location and build a new monument at a much smaller scale that's much easier to use to measure the size of the planet.
Yeah, got you. Excellent. Okay, shall I move on, or is there anything else to add on? Are the circles relevant there?
The circles are just so that you can see where Avebury and Silbury Hill is, but I guess we should note that the true south direction of Silbury Hill seems to be at a tangent to the outer circle of Avebury.
Ooh.
Yeah, rather than going straight from the middle, they've
That's
gone from
correct.
the edge of the monument, but perfectly on the edge of the monument.
My hunch as to why that might be is because of people might need to get a clear line to true south for some other purpose. I don't believe that these monuments were built for just one thing. I believe they were built for multiple purposes. So they might have wanted a clear line of sight true south. So building Silbury Hill true south is going to block your view of the horizon.
Right, that's a far better practical explanation. I was thinking about building a triangle from the other edge of Avebury down to Silbury, and what would that would tell us. But I think you're right. It's just practical. It's sighting, isn't it? That's the reason, I think.
I think it's for sighting, but there might be other reasons. There's something called Marlborough Mound about, I think, 6 kilometers to the east that's dated to the same period. I've no idea what Marlborough Mound was used for at all. It could have just been ceremonial. There might not have been any sort of astronomical purpose, but given what I'm seeing here, there probably was something astronomical at Marlborough Mound.
Mm. Okay, shall I move forward?
2 slides now, I think. Okay, so this is where I've located my proposed lost city of Atlantis. So obviously it's all in blue, so it's difficult to make out, but you should be able to see the 2 concentric rings. They correlate with the size of the rings that Plato describes for Atlantis. This sits at a tangent to the 3/7 line of latitude. Given that it's 1,428 kilometers between lines of latitude, it's a heck of a coincidence. So I think it's more than a coincidence. This is some evidence that I think lends more credibility to my argument that this could be the lost city of Atlantis.
I'm just struggling to see the scale there, but it looks like, is that 5 kilometers in the bottom left?
That's correct, yes. So it's the same, that scale at the left is the same width as the city, or what I'm calling the city.
Wow. And what's that big ridge line to the south of that goes through that red arrow?
That's just the edge of the bathymetric scan.
Oh,
This is one of the things you need to be careful of, because if you go on YouTube, a lot of people say they found underwater structures and roads, and often it's just the edge of the scan lines from the bathymetric survey. So what we can tell from that is that the bathymetric survey was either going from east to west or west to east.
right.
And that's the very edge. This European agency, EMOD, they've stitched, I don't know how much work it was, but they've stitched together thousands of bathymetric scans to put together a picture of all the European bathymetric data. It's an insane project, and it's kind of like Google Earth but underwater.
Wow. And who's funding them? Where do they get the money from to do this?
I've no idea.
Interesting to know.
It would be, wouldn't it?
Yeah, because
It was probably us when we were in the EU.
Cool. Right.
But yeah, you might be asking, why is this at a tangent to the 3/7 line of latitude?
Mm.
I think there could be an answer in the next slide.
Oh, let's see. Well, hello. Got some
So if you look-
Egyptians.
Mm.
That's right, yes. I don't want to get into it too much here, because I'm about to release a video in the next few weeks about different mythologies that tie into Atlantis. But Plato's story isn't the only story that relates to Atlantis. So there are other flood myths that are very similar or have very close parallels. That includes the Egyptians. There's other cultures from around the world: South America, Japan, China, parts of Europe. Everywhere seems to have a very, very similar flood myth. Babylon, Sumerians, just everyone. And there's 3 or 4 different iterations in Egypt of the flood myth, but it all stems from a primeval mound that arose on an island that was floating in the middle of the ocean. And this is a sort of artist's interpretation. I think this is from about 1000 BC or something. It's an artist's interpretation of that sort of location of the Egyptian Atlantis, and this they called it the island of the egg, right. And it was the first place to be sort of civilized. And a primeval mound was formed on this island, and to the east of the primeval mound, the sun rises between 2 hills or two mountains, and this is supposed to, I think this represents the location of Atlantis. And if you go to the next slide, that yellow line, if Atlantis was exactly on that 3/7 line of latitude, the sunrise on the equinoxes would be blocked by what is now Fayal Island in the Azores. And if you move the site a little to the south, which you'll see in the next slide,
bang,
the sun rises between these two mountains. So that might explain why that, again, for purposes of astronomy, that location has been moved, so you get a clear line of sight to the sunrise on the horizon of the equinoxes.
Right. So you look at those sort of 2 mountaintops there with the sun in the middle, and then if you knock back a couple, there we have it there. It's interesting.
Also, that symbol there.
Sorry, go on.
That symbol of the sunrise between the 2 mountains. There's actually an Egyptian hieroglyphic for that, for sunrise. It's called the Arket. And in the ancient Egyptian calendar, the Arket also represented the season of the flood. So there's another link to that as well.
Right. And we've got the 2 ladies here pouring the waters.
That's right. They're pouring the waters around the primeval mound at Zep Tepi, the first time of creation.
Wow. Do we know what these little dudes inside the globe are? They look like they look like compasses.
Well, I'm not sure. I can't find much information on this, but I'm guessing they represent the Ogdoad, or the various peoples that built the various temples and buildings on the primeval mound and on the island of creation. These do look a little bit like they could be surveying tools for measuring angles.
They definitely do, yeah. I think those are Atlanteans with compasses and huge boners. There's 8 of them measuring the world. Look, it's like you mentioned the 7 levels of not latitude. It's like them. It's like there's 1 at each level further down the globe, taking a measurement.
Could be.
What do I know? I don't know.
No, it could be. It might be. It could be tied into the mythology. I think the stories have obviously deviated over time. Like I said, I don't want to go into it too much in this video, but there's a lot of strong similarities between all the creation myths, where twins feature heavily. There's always a primeval mound. There's always the tree of life, an axis mundi, etc. And it looks like all of these stories have stemmed from Proto-Indo-European peoples before any sort of modern civilization that we would know of. And obviously these were pre-literate peoples, and that might explain the differences between the creation stories found around the world.
Got you. Wonderful. Yeah. Shall I click to the next one?
Yes, please.
Okay, what have we got here? Oh, we're back at Bimini.
Okay, so Bimini is not a huge island. I don't know the size of it off the top of my head, but it's quite a small island. I've superimposed the Bimini Road onto this picture, and this shows you again how close Bimini is to the 2/7 line of latitude. And it turns out that Bimini used to be one of the peaks of a much larger island that submerged probably about 8,000 years ago. So obviously where I'm saying Atlantis is located, it's very contentious because it's such a deep site that I have to prove that it goes beyond the standard model. Whereas this island that Bimini used to be part of, it's only sort of 10 or 15 meters below current day sea levels. So it was definitely above water for the first few thousand years of the Holocene. So it's only relatively recently that this island has sunk, and it's bigger than the country of Ireland. So
Wow.
we can see that on the next slide.
Yeah, that's one of the things is that they say 400 feet roughly for sea level, and the Azores proposed location is quite a bit below that. But I think I remember from our last talk that you were talking about there's the question of isostatic depression, and this is where these fault lines meet, and there's all sorts of volcanism and other things going on right at that position that, you know, sort of all bets are off, really.
I think so. I think it's a geologically unique location,
Yes, exactly, yeah.
in the Azores, and that might explain why it goes up and down. But also, there's a paper that somebody released about 20 years ago saying that every 3 to 5 million years there's significant crustal thickening in the Azores, where it triples in thickness, and then I think it recedes afterwards. So that might explain how it could float up out of the mantle below to be above sea level, where other locations on the planet wouldn't be able to do that.
I might be dreaming this, but would the Azores have been the center of Pangaea?
That's right. I do mention that in my geology videos, and basically, if you look into the work of Alfred Wegener, so he put together The Origin of Continents 110 years ago, where he realized all of the continents fit together like a jigsaw puzzle. And I'm arguing that in the ancient past, if somebody mapped the world in the ancient past, they were bound to see the same thing. They would have spotted the continents fit together. And if they put them back together, they would have seen that the Azores would have been the very center of Pangaea. Well, obviously, people weren't around there, but it might have made sense as to why they could have chose.
Hey, they might have been around. Don't say never. I know it's a couple 100 million years ago or more, but maybe that's why they called it the navel of the world, you know?
Well, exactly. And because the continents are still very heavily distributed to one side of the planet, it would make sense that if you're going to have a mapping system, you'd want to use the very, the center of this offset continental mass. It would make sense to use the most central point, which would be the Azores, if you wound everything back to sort of 200 million years ago. So it would have been convenient, and it might have also tied into some of the mythology that might have come later about the planet being an egg that's cracked open and spread across the surface of the planet.
Yeah, the cosmic egg. I mean, that's ubiquitous as well across ancient civilizations. The creation of the world myth, the cosmic egg. Yeah, Pangaea getting smashed up. Nice, love it.
But briefly going back to Plato, if you read Plato, his dialogues of Timaeus and Critias, he states that Atlantis was the way to other islands before you get to the Americas. Well, he doesn't say Americas, he says the opposite continent, which is truly a boundless continent. But there's islands you come to beforehand, and he seems to imply that the Atlanteans had reign over those islands. So these could have been, useful for Atlantean outposts. They may have been set foot in America, and Bimini would have been a great location because it's at the 2/7 line of latitude, but also you're not on the actual main American continent, which again was full of bigger and nastier animals than we had in Europe. So it would have been easier to sort of manage wildlife. As you well know, in our own country, we managed to wipe out all the wolves and beavers and everything. You could probably do that on a small island.
Yeah, the size of the island of Ireland. Yeah, it makes sense. Yeah, forget them big cats and
giant
sloths. Short-faced cave bears, size of a frigging Abraham's tank. Yeah, we'll just stay here, thanks. We'll just nip over there when we need to.
Yeah,
exactly.
Makes sense. Cool. Anything else on this one, or?
I will briefly mention Cuba in a bit. So I'll leave that to the end because there's a picture at the end relating to Cuba. But I believe, I think it's Andrew Collins and his colleague Dr. Greg Little. They've proposed a location for Atlantis in Cuba, and it actually ties into my geodetic coordinates on my map. I'll show you at the end.
Okay, cool.
Okay, this is just to show you the date that I'm proposing. This giant island sank. So that picture I just showed you a minute ago, that submerged landmass is called the Great Bahama Bank, and I've put in the average sea level at the Great Bahama Bank, and it ties into a submergence date of about 8,000 years ago.
Right, so relatively recently, 6,000
Yes.
BC.
So if Atlantis in the Azores was real, this place would have been the next place to go to for a few thousand years.
Right, got you. Yeah, so if we take Plato's date, which would have been about
12,000 years ago.
Yeah, 11,000 years ago. You could have travelled west, got to the home base, if you like, or this land that they ruled, and you'd be cool there for a few thousand years.
And that might even tie into the stories of the Aztec, where they claimed their ancestors came over from the Isle of Aslan, which sounds a lot like Atlan.
Right, yeah. That would be Oannes and these civilizing influencers who came over with the beards and the fish tails and shit.
So there's various sort of Mesoamerican and South American civilizations. They've all got slightly different creation stories, but again, they've got very close links with one another. I think it's the North American stories that are a little bit more vague. Some of them seem to contradict each other. Some of them tie in quite well to the Mesoamerican creation stories as well. Again, I'll get into that more in my next video.
Nice. Okay, shall I move on?
Yes, please.
Ooh, now we're on land. Oh, Delphi. We're back in Europe.
So I just wanted to point out where Delphi was with regards to the 3/7 line of latitude. So that's the same latitude as Atlantis. It's 10 kilometers south of the line of latitude. But as pointed out by Hugh Newman, so I don't know if you guys have heard of Hugh Newman.
No.
He writes books and makes YouTube videos about very similar subjects. And in one of his videos, he states that somebody else has pointed out there's a location further up the mountain, further north, that would have placed the location at the 3/7 line of latitude. But there's also another important thing to point out. If you, on the right-hand side of this picture, there's that big white blob is actually a mountain, and that's called Mount Parnassus. That's very, very important in Greek mythology. It's called Parnassus after the ancient ruler of a city called Parnassus, who his city flooded, and I think he sought salvation on that mountain. But that's not the only Greek flood mythology. It's also related to the flood of Deucalion and Pyrrha. I don't know if you've heard that story, but that's basically a story about it's the Greek version of Noah's Ark, basically. And I believe Deucalion's father was Prometheus. He tried to steal fire from Zeus. Zeus constrained him in chains on Mount Caucasus, and when Deucalion went to visit him, he told him that the world's going to flood, build an ark. And after the flood took place, Deucalion and his wife Pyrrha, their ark landed on Mount Parnassus. So there's two flood mythologies that relate to Mount Parnassus. Both, Parnassus and Delphi are very close to that 3/7 line of latitude.
Did you say before the other author said that he felt there was another location for Delphi bang on the 3/7 latitude?
Not bang on. I don't know where it is exactly, but it's further north than Delphi. So it was probably an original location that preceded Delphi.
Right. Okay.
If you look at Hugh Newman at his YouTube channel and his Delphi video, there might be some more detail in there.
Cool.
He also points out some of the Cyclopean architecture at Delphi that you don't find in many other places in Greece.
Really?
Yes.
That's interesting. Wherever we find Cyclopean architecture, that's like a alarm bell, isn't it? Something's might be dealing with some advanced stonemasonry technology. Who knows?
It might point out that it could be older than it's suggested. So again, Delphi, there might be newer things at Delphi that are built on an older site.
Yes, because often the Cyclopean stuff is in like the first courses, isn't it? Or the foundations, and then it's more modern Roman and Greek stuff on top.
That's correct, yes.
Yeah, cool. Okay, shall I move on?
Yes, please.
Oh, Ziggy Dan, Delphi is a nubbed site, and he would know.
Yes,
Because he's a nub collector.
he is a nub.
Oh, we've got another egg.
Oh,
So that's the Omphalos stone I was talking about earlier in the video. So again, if you look at Richard Heath's book, he points out there's a Greek myth where Zeus is trying to find the center of the planet, which could be what you would call the axis mundi. And he sent out two eagles, one from the north, one from the south. And Richard Heath argues the 2/7 line of latitude is what represents where the eagle from the south left, and the 4/7 line of latitude represents the northern location that the eagle left. And they met in the middle at Delphi, where Zeus placed the Omphalos stone, which is supposed to represent the center of the earth or the navel of the earth. I assume he didn't weld the bar around the outside there.
Now, when you say this is the Omphalos stone, is it, or is it a recreation, a homage? So I thought it had
I'm not
been
sure.
lost.
I'm guessing it's been lost. Yeah, I can't imagine something like one. If you look at the state of the rest of the site at Delphi, I couldn't imagine of all things the Omphalos stone would be the one thing sort
They
of
would
remaining
leave.
as it's yeah.
We'll leave that. Get the treasure, get the gold, get all the tithes. So we'll leave the sacred meteorite. It looks right though. I mean, it's supposed to be 600 mil or 2 feet to old imperial chaps. 600 mil to the millennials. 600 mil tall, I think it's supposed to be, isn't it? And conical.
I've no idea of the dimensions.
Don't know how many stadia that is.
I don't know why it's conical. Maybe again, it's supposed to represent the egg of the northern hemisphere, possibly.
Oh yeah.
There are Omphalos stones found in ancient sites in people's homes in Bulgaria from 5,000 years ago. And on the Omphalos stone, there are lines drawn that might be akin to sort of navigation lines. It might be a tribute to the old world globe that they tell stories of, possibly. I mean, obviously, this is conjecture at this point.
Yeah.
But, I think it could represent, the navel center of the Earth, and it's also representing the shape could be to do with the egg, the egg, Earth egg.
Mm. Cool. Okay, let's move on. Oh.
Okay, so this is the temple site of Karnak, which would have been on the east of Thebes, the old capital Thebes. And basically, just above that label saying the precinct of Amun-Re, there's a temple there where there was also another Omphalos stone that's no longer there.
Nice. Is
Okay,
this...
so that's
I'm just trying to think, Karnak, is this the same temple that Shwala Delubich spent most of his life looking into?
I've not looked into his work at the
No.
moment. It's
Luxor.
Yeah, so that's all in the same area. Luxor, Thebes, Karnak, it's all the same. I think Luxor might even just be the modern name, possibly.
Yeah, I think it is. So that could be the Temple of Man.
There are a number of temples there. I can't remember the temple it's supposed to be in. The Temple of Mut, possibly. I'm not great at ancient Egyptian temples, unfortunately. But that temple to the north of the precinct of Amun-Re point that I've put on there is the temple it would have been located at.
It appears
that's
sorry, go on.
that's also the location. The green line goes straight through. There's like an avenue of sphinxes that goes straight through that line.
Wow, like a east to west avenue of sphinxes, and the line goes through it.
It's not east to west. You can see it's sort of closer to north to south. They're not perfectly north to south. So I just found it interesting that they went through the avenue of sphinxes.
Excellent.
Okay, should we move on to the next one?
Certainly.
Okay, so there's another site on the 3/7 line of latitude. It's called Almendres Cromlech. Forgive me if my pronunciation is not very good. But it's 1.57 kilometers south of the 3/7 line of latitude. And it's the largest group of standing stones in the Iberian Peninsula.
Wow, and it's within 1.5 kilometers.
Interestingly, 1.5 kilometers, 1.57 is exactly half of pi. And I think there's a strong link between the modern kilometer and possibly ancient units of measurement. If we take a circle of 1 meter in diameter, if you divide the circumference by 6, you have exactly 1 Royal Egyptian cubit. So that links into the ancient sexagesimal system.
Right. So like they counted everything by 6 and 12 and multitudes of 12.
And divisions of 60, for example.
Yeah, whereas we use 10, don't we? For everything, it seems. The decimal system. They use, 6. Yeah, when you get into this sort of ancient numerology, everything's divisible by 6, 360, and all the processional numbers, I think, all the harmonic numbers are similar, I think.
Yeah, so Almendres Cromlech, it's a similar site to Avebury. So I said it's the largest group of standing stones in the entire Iberian Peninsula, but it's also 3,000 years older than Avebury or the pyramids. So it's a really old site.
Wow, excellent.
I think I've put a couple of pictures in, if you scroll on, that show you what Almendres Cromlech looks like.
Is that it?
That's it. And then there's an overhead shot as well. And it looks like it's pointing, if you look at a map, it looks like it's pointing to the west, and it's on the same latitude as Atlantis, which is a bit of coincidence.
There's a lot of coincidences along this on this line.
Yeah, excellent. Okay.
So if we move on, again at that same latitude, 2 kilometers north of the Atlantis latitude, there's what looks like a gigantic mound. This is in northeast Kentucky. I'm going to be careful here because it could just be natural, but this mound, this mound's located in a ridge complex. I'm guessing it's a glacial ridge complex, but there's nothing else in that entire complex that looks like this. And I'm wondering if you compare it to the ridge on the right, if somebody's carved out a section of that ridge to form a mound, and that mound also happens to be the exact same width as the central island of Atlantis. It's 5 stadia in width. And coincidentally, it's exactly 1 radian in distance from Almendres Cromlech. So it's out by a kilometer or something, but otherwise it's exactly 1 radian in distance from Almendres Cromlech.
What's a radian?
So a radian is a unit of measure. It's exactly 1 radius unit, but as an arc on a circle. So if you take the radius, of any circle and lay it onto the surface, or onto the circumference, and bend it, that's a radian.
Oh, right.
Okay. So there's 2 pi radians. So there's 6.28 radians in a circle.
Gosh.
And that, if you look into the video I released, episode 9 on my YouTube series, it explains that in more detail, but it could be quite significant.
Who owns the land here? Is it public land or private?
I think it might be private property. So obviously people shouldn't go running up there and excavating the site because they might get shot or something. I don't know.
Definitely get shot in Kentucky. No doubt about it. You should find out. find out who owns the land and see, has anything... Have you... I know this is... We're sort of speculating here and hypothesizing because, like you said, it could be natural, this formation, but have you done anything further? Have you looked into who owns the land? Has any work been done there? Has anyone ever noticed this thing before?
So I have no idea how to start about going that how to do that, but it's something I do want to look into. If anyone's watching this and they know how to do it and want to do it and update us, that would be cool as well.
Yeah. Okay. We'll work on that.
Yeah.
For next week. Okay. Shall I click on?
Yes, please. Okay, so that mound we saw in the previous picture, it's exactly 48, as in 48.00 kilometers from the tail of Serpent Mound. So there's a lot of other mounds in Kentucky and the surrounding states, built by various cultures, including the Hopewell culture. Again, I think there's a strong link between the unit of kilometers and ancient units of measurement. So the idea being that the modern meter is supposed to be 10 million meters or 10,000 kilometers from the equator to the North Pole, which would make an entire circumference of the world 40 million meters or 40,000 kilometers. All of these ancient sites over Egypt and parts of the sort of Near and Middle East, they're separated by distances that are divisible by 4 kilometers. And you'll see that all these locations here are made up from a number of right-angled triangles as well.
I'm just seeing magic numbers here. 1080, 1440, 960.
Exactly.
Do you know why your TV's 1080p?
Yeah.
Because Giza is is that far from Göbekli Tepe.
Because it's a harmonic number.
It's a harmonic number. We've talked. Ryan Seven's been through all this with us. Randall Carlson goes over it. There's a reason why these numbers keep recurring. But it suggests that these guys who built this shit knew.
Yes.
And this was a reason why they selected the location.
Or possibly the people that built these, more modern sites. I think they may well have built on older locations. Whether or not they knew what was going on, I have a hunch the Egyptians knew what was going on. Whether or not everyone else knew what was going on, I don't know.
Yeah, and we've not really mentioned, we've not really been to Mesopotamia yet in this geodetic adventure. But that's Ur of the Chaldees, so that's ancient Babylon, isn't it?
So the ziggurat of Ur started out, I believe it was Sumerian originally, and then it was refurbished by the Babylonians.
Yeah, right, got you.
The modernization by the Babylonians.
Yeah, modern, yeah. Well, they built like seven steps
Yes.
in a ziggurat.
Yes, exactly. Yes.
And
Northern Hemisphere link.
Yes. And sort of seen as possible analogous with pyramids, stepped pyramids.
So. Yes, in my video, episode 9, I mentioned that I believe the Great Pyramid is trying to encode the 7 steps in its dimensions. So the Great Pyramid is a square-based model of a hemisphere.
Yep.
And if you look into the mathematics of it, because it's got 4 sides, it kind of almost secretly encodes the 7 latitudes into it. I won't go into that here. It gets really heavy on the numbers. So tune into episode 9 on my YouTube channel to get to the bottom of that. But I think both the sort of model of the universe, the Babylonian model of the universe, where the Earth is a 7-stepped great ziggurat, and the Great Pyramid of Giza, I believe they're both trying to represent the 7 latitudes that ancient geodeters would have used to measure the northern hemisphere.
And then we've got Göbekli Tepe up there, which is at least, 10,000 years old, if not older?
I think they're saying it's at least 12,000 years old. It's part of a larger complex. There's other things up there as well.
Yeah. See, about 5%, isn't it? That's been excavated. Something stupid.
That's right. There's a lot to do. It's an exciting region to be if you're an archaeologist, I believe. So.
Well, yeah, because there's Karahan Tepe and loads of... They keep finding these tepes. They
seem to be finding them. They find them all the time. And it's one of the few places in the world where they are genuinely excavating ancient sites. There's a number of places around the world where it's either too dangerous or you just can't get funding to excavate sites that might be of extreme importance to our lost history.
Yes, and politics enters the equation as well, doesn't it? Unfortunately.
I think so, yeah.
Excellent. Love that. Oh, here's a radian.
Yeah, there's that radian distance that I spoke about between Almendris Cromlech and what I'm calling the Mystery Mound, both on the same latitude, on the Atlantis latitude.
So that is 1 radian of the world at that latitude. Is that what I'm seeing?
It's so that yellow line is it's not on that latitude, so that's the shortest distance. So I think they were looking for the shortest possible distance between those 2 points, but they also mark out the same latitude. But if you can probably look at you can kind of make out the old Ice Age coastline on Google Maps, not perfectly, but it would have, if you followed that route, it would have halved the amount of time in the ocean. You would have been able to take most of the rest of that journey by land.
Got you. Right. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Imagine travelling sort of on a northern arc there.
Yeah, and that's shorter than following the
latitude line.
Yeah.
Excellent. But you can't go to Atlantis if you go that way.
No, you would.
But
sad times.
You can probably. Well, it might be that somewhere, I'll show you at the end, Almendris Cromlech might have been a navigational waypoint to point you to a number of different locations.
Oh, excellent.
I'll show you at the end. Oh, there it is. That's this is the slide I was talking about. So there's the 3 latitudes. There's some other sort of geodetic triangles that link together Atlantis, the Richat structure, and Avebury. Similarly, I've created a new triangle. So I heard from Dr. Greg Little, and he said he's placed Atlantis in Cuba along with Andrew Collins. And I thought, well, I have a hunch that the Richat structure might have been used for geodesy because it's a massive, great big circle that you don't have to build. It was already there. And I wondered if you've heard of René Levasseur Island. It's a 200 million year old meteor crater in Canada. It's 70 odd kilometers in diameter. It's a big circular lake. I thought that might be an equivalent point to the Richat structure. And once Greg Little mentioned his location for Atlantis in Cuba, I drew a straight line between his Atlantis and René Levasseur Island, and it forms 2 perfectly symmetrical right angle triangles that link to that mystery mound I spoke about earlier.
That's weird.
Okay, and it gets even weirder. If you draw a great circle, again, that's the shortest path across the surface of the globe. If you draw a great circle from Thebes straight through Almendris Cromlech, not near it, straight through the middle of Almendris Cromlech, it takes you to the exact center of Greg Little and Andrew Collins' Atlantis site in Cuba. It's not near it, it goes straight into the very center. I think these are all starting to get beyond coincidence.
And is it going through Atlantis as well? The Azores Atlantis?
It's going through the Azores. It's a few kilometers north of where I'm saying Atlantis is, but it's going straight through the
island.
Center of.
It would have been an island at the time.
Yeah, it's going straight through the center of what would have been an island at the time.
Wow.
That's not the end of the story.
Okay.
I did something once I made that link between Thebes, Almendris Cromlech, and this Cuban Atlantis site. I thought, well, maybe Avebury's trying to do something similar to Almendris Cromlech. So I drew a line from Delphi to René Levasseur Island. It comes very close to Avebury, but if we draw that line from Mount Parnassus, the one that's linked with all the flood myths, just slightly east of Delphi, it goes straight through the center of Avebury into René Levasseur Island. So I think this is all for purposes of ancient geodesy and cartography. I think we might have found some ancient system of navigating the Atlantic Ocean in particular.
And you said the René Island thing is an ancient crater, millions of year old crater.
Yeah, I think it might be in the next slide. I might have actually shown it.
That's recount.
That's the Richat. Try the next one. Or was that the last one?
24,000.
Let me just check. I'm going to check my folder. Yes, it's 27. The next slide on from this one.
Barrington Crater. Oh, there we are.
Okay.
So that's in Canada. That's about 72 kilometers in diameter, on the same latitude as Avebury.
72 kilometers in diameter.
I think so. Yeah, 72. Yeah.
Now that has to be a coincidence. 'Cause it's a meteor crater, but
Yeah.
but still.
This is 213 million years old. So again, I don't believe we were on the planet at that time. So, but I think that Rene Levasseur Island and the Richat structure would have been very convenient locations to mark out this system. Rene Levasseur Island wouldn't have been visible until after the Ice Age, so that would tie into this Cuban Atlantis site that might have been inhabited after the Ice Age ended. I think that people may have left or fled Atlantis, both east and west. I think the west location would have been the Bahamas and Cuba, because it's a safer location to be. And maybe when they started to try and plot everything back out, they used this as their second waypoint.
After the ice sheet had receded.
That's right, yeah. You wouldn't have been able to see this 20,000 years ago, or probably even 12, 13,000 years ago. It would have been just covered in ice.
Yeah, 2 mile thick ice sheet above it. And then just going back. So which one? Is this Richat?
So this is I think it's a crater, a meteor crater about 200 kilometers northeast of the Richat structure.
Right.
So again, I don't know if the Richat structure would have been used as a location. I think as a minimum it was used for geodesy, because it's a convenient concentric circular feature. You're not going to miss it. But there's definitely artifacts there. They're not advanced artifacts. They're sort of Stone Age artifacts that do tie into about 11,600 years ago.
Right, that people would have used it. Are you
crater?
Sorry, Matt. Are you of the school that the Richat is natural?
I believe it's natural, yes.
Yeah, that's the Richat structure. They call it the Eye of the Sahara in North Africa. It's very interesting.
I think there's very strong links to the Atlantis location I've proposed, just because it geodetically links up. So I'm saying as a minimum, I think it was used for measuring and navigation, but there's definitely artifacts there that date back to about that same sort of time. It's definitely not the place that Plato describes, if you take the stadia as being 185 meters.
Right, it's the wrong size to be Atlantis.
But there is something that the Richat structure does match that I don't think there's any other location that matches the Richat structure. And Plato describes Atlantis as being on a plane that's 2,000 stadia by 3,000 stadia, which that's the size of the entire Azores plateau. And it's not a plane, it's mostly mountains. But if you draw a line north to south of the plateau that the Richat structure sits on, it's exactly 2,000 stadia north to south, and that kind of ties into Plato's description. So I'm wondering if Plato or the Egyptians, where Plato got his story from originally, have tied together a load of ancient mythologies from the Ice Age, and they've got details mixed up, perhaps.
Yeah, it's like Chinese whispers, and they've been trying to sort of pass down all this information, tons and tons of geodetic information, and it's just got sort of mangled up together, and that's what we've come out with.
I think the other sort of proof for that really is that the various creation stories found throughout the world that are so similar yet have differences sort of proves the whole Chinese whispers kind of example you just raised.
Yeah,
there is.
Sorry,
carry on.
No, I was just going to say we have to remember that the original account that everyone sort of takes as the launchpad, the Plato account, he's recording that as it was told to Solon, 200-300 years before Plato, by the Egyptian priests. And they're saying that this happened 9,000 years before them. So, it's not going to be bang on, is it? There's going to be inaccuracies and who knows what going on. And
it's important to mention in Plato's dialogues, I think he sort of mentions from the storyteller's point of view. I've had a night to think about this. I'm trying to retell it as best as I can remember.
Yeah.
So that's a key point. But I used to believe that Plato's Dialogues was the sort of only source for the Atlantean myth. But if you look into other creation mythologies, cosmologies, and the Proto-Indo-European story, it looks like there are stories that relate to the same place that date way further back than Plato. I think it's called Atlantis in Plato's story, and it's given different names in other mythologies, and most importantly, I think in the Aztec mythology, the island that their ancestors left was called Aztlan, which is so close to Atlan that it's got to get you thinking.
Yeah.
This crater on the right hand side, it's 1.9 kilometers in diameter. That's 200 kilometers away from the Richat structure, and that crater was formed anywhere between 30,000 years ago and 11,700 years ago, the date that the Younger Dryas ended. And this thing was huge. It was it's not enough to cause an extinction event, not even close, but it's bigger than the Barringer crater in Arizona, just for comparison. So it would have been like a small nuclear bomb going off.
Yeah, and 11,000, that's within the time frame for possibly being involved with the, if we go off the comet impact theory hypothesis, that North America got sort of buckshotted with comet fragments. That could have been a straggler that hit North Africa.
It could be, yeah. It could well be.
Fits in temporally. Nice. Okay, I'll skip ahead to the next one. Oh, we've done this one, haven't we? Have we any more?
There's just one more picture.
Oh.
If you go to the very end.
Ooh.
You can probably just ignore the red arrow for now. I think that's where I've placed Almendris Cromlech. But this is what I'm suggesting from the stories at Delphi, where Delphi is supposed to be the center of the world. And it's on the same latitude as Atlantis. And there's all these different Axis Mundi stories in the creation mythologies. I'm suggesting that the latitude of Atlantis and Delphi, Almendris Cromlech, and that mystery mound in Kentucky, I'm suggesting that is the Axis Mundi. So an axis is just a reference line for measuring coordinates, and Mundi means world. So a global reference line for measuring coordinates. And I would say it would have made sense to put an ancient prime meridian through the center of Atlantis, because that's the most central point when you reverse the continents together.
Right. So instead of Greenwich Mean Time, this could have been the primordial
Atlantis Mean Time. Yeah.
Atlantis Mean Time. Wow. And so that would have been the way they calibrated their what you call it, your observations when you're ocean going. They would have used that reference point.
I think that would have been the point of common reference. So there probably would have been lookup charts where you reference the moon and its relative positions to various stars to calculate your longitude. And like the 0 point, I would say, would be Atlantis. And then you could say that east of Atlantis is Avebury, for example, and west of Atlantis is Bimini.
This Axis Mundi, Axis Mundi, I think wasn't on that line, of the Chaldees? No, it's too north, isn't it? I'm getting mixed up. I'm just wondering, you've sort of found places in Spain and Greece. Have you gone further east into like China, and it looks like it cuts through Japan there? Have you been able to find anything else?
I've not had a chance to look at the whole planet yet, but I've looked in Kazakhstan, because I looked at specifically in a location in Kazakhstan because I chose the same distance between Avebury and René Levasseur Island. I thought, what if we go east exactly the same distance? And there's a collection of geoglyphs in Kazakhstan that date back. No one knows how old. They could be 1,000 years old. They could be 8,000 years old. That's the consensus. And there's big circular rings of mounds in Kazakhstan on that latitude. There's hundreds of them, and there's very little archaeology that's been done there. Some people are trying to attribute it all to the times of Genghis Khan, and other people are saying this is archaeologists. There's no real consensus. There are archaeologists saying it's 1,000 years old, and some other archaeologists saying they found evidence that it's 8,000 years old. But it's so hard to find anything about this site in Kazakhstan. I think if you start looking around the world, you might start to find other things at these latitudes. I think these latitudes were chosen on purpose because they relate to pi. We approximate pi in fractions as 22/7. Sort of decimal floating point, or irrational numbers as we call them today, that's a relatively modern phenomenon. I don't think ancient peoples had irrational numbers. I think they could only work with fractions, and it's likely ancient people also used 22/7 for pi. So it's possible that if other people were trying to map the world, they might have come to the same conclusion independently. And you might find other locations that may or may not be related to what I'm calling Atlantis, but they could still be on the key latitudes because it's the only real simple way to do it.
22/7.
So pi is 3.141, and 22/7 as a fraction is 3.142 or something like that. It's about 4% above the true value of pi.
Right.
So if you split the line, if you split the diameter of a circle into 7 equal chunks, you'll get 22 of those chunks will go around the actual circumference of that same circle.
Right. Right, got you. And that'll work north to south just the same as east to west. So if you're dividing the Earth by 7 lines of latitude, like the 7-step ziggurat,
you might want to do it in the longitude to take into account the oblate nature of the Earth, possibly.
Right, because it's a bit fatter.
We all get pudgy around the middle, don't we?
I certainly do. Not 26 miles, like. Wow. This is really interesting. I'm loving it. Yeah, we need to go where we're going then. Kazakhstan, you think?
Maybe we can get some funding for a dig. Yeah.
Do you think?
Yeah.
Well, I really want to go to the Azores because there's a number of anomalies on the present day Azores. I don't think you can date any of them back to the time of the end of the Younger Dryas and the start of the Holocene, but it looks like there could be Roman hypogeums on the Azores. So these are sort of like places where you put funerary urns, and it could very well be that there's other megalithic sites that are very deeply buried in earth now in the Azores as well that might date back to the time of the Egyptians possibly. So a lot more needs to be done. There's not a lot of archaeology going on. I know there's somebody native to the Azores making some videos in Portuguese about some of these sites, and there's also a professor of physics at the University of the Azores that's trying to take these things seriously. I don't think a lot of people are taking him seriously, which is a shame because he's a genuine professor of physics. Obviously that they're saying you're not a historian, you're not an archaeologist. But, well, you know, he's a smart guy, so it's a bit disingenuous to just write people off.
It's always been the same, isn't it? You know, as soon as you mention Atlantis, the mainstream scholarship will label you as a crank.
Yeah.
So that's just the way it is.
I'd rather be a crank than a normie, though, to be fair.
Amen. Well, on that note,
yeah.
What do we need to do, Matt? We need to go to your YouTube channel, subscribe there.
Yeah, if you go to my YouTube channel, obviously you can probably see the link above my head.
Be in the show notes as well.
Yeah, if you go to my YouTube channel, that's the best point to sort of follow me. You can also find my Twitter link on my YouTube channel. But yeah, I've got a couple more videos coming out about, maybe one more about Atlantis. I'm going to write a book about all of my findings so far.
Oh, nice.
I just want to sort of get my argument out there so that either somebody else who's got the money can survey the site, or potentially I could get enough recognition that I could raise the money myself through crowdfunding, for example, to see if we can do a more detailed survey of the site to start with, and then see what's going on. But yeah, the best place to follow me for now is on my YouTube channel. All the links are on my YouTube channel. But yeah, I don't release videos very often, but every sort of 2 or 3 months. But yeah, I think that's it, guys.
And have you started the book yet, did you say?
I've compiled all of the information from my videos into one big document. I've got additional information in there I've not presented on my videos, and I'm hoping to get a self-published book out within the next 6 to 12 months, depending on my workload outside of my hobby/obsession.
Brilliant. Well, look forward to that. You have to let us know. Make sure you let us know when it comes out.
Yeah.
If you need any proofreaders, I'll volunteer.
Yeah.
Yeah, that would be good. I do want proofreaders to be fair.
Okay, sign me up. Put me in, coach. Well, it's been a pleasure. Nice to see you, Matt, again.
Nice to see you guys.
And
Cheers.
as we said, links are in the show notes. Subscribe to Matt's channel. It's really interesting. It's a different take on this stuff, compared to a lot of the other guys and gals on YouTube. Some proper hard maths in there, which I'm not very good at, but you do a good job of sort of shepherding us retards through the higher maths.
Yeah, that's right.
Excellent. Okay, stay on the line for us while we play ourselves out, and we'll see you guys on the flip side for part 2 for some news. Okay.
Bye.
I said c'est la vie then. What am I talking about?